Gerry, you remember that Russian submarine that fucking had that nuclear incident and killed everyone on board?
Yeah, I remember that.
They also did it with a town.
Those crazy Russians.
Oh my god, I don't know anymore. Who's your daddy?
Chernobyl. I'll just edit out your stupidity.
By the way, they're vomiting. Yeah. Welcome back to another episode of Beautiful Bastards. What's going on, everyone? What's going on, Gerry?
Same thing that's going on every week on this show. We're going to talk about some stuff.
People dying?
Usually. That's typically what we run into. But today we're talking specifically about one of your favorite topics, Grizz.
The motherland?
Yes, Mother Russia and face-melting nuclear accidents.
Oh, yes. You know what warms the cockles of my heart.
You got it. That's right. Now, today is all about Chernobyl. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. Maybe some of you have been there, since now we can visit. But for those of you who have somehow managed to never hear of this place, Chernobyl is the site of a 1986 nuclear reactor explosion and the worst nuclear power plant accident in history, actually. And ironically, it blew up because of poorly executed safety tests.
As well as a shit ton of lying.
If you're wondering, it did not pass the safety test.
No, it didn't.
Nope, it did not. So on April 26th of 1986, it's actually the 25th and 26th, plant operators attempted a routine safety test on reactor number 4 in Chernobyl. And it didn't take long for things to unravel, resulting in reactor 4 on site suffering 2 explosions. 2 people died right away, and an additional 28 died in the following days, weeks, and months from ARS, or acute radiation syndrome. And beyond that, the UN estimated in a 2005 commission that the death toll would probably be around 4,000 people between immediate deaths and long-term illnesses, mostly cancers, leukemia, and thyroid disorders related to ARS from exposure. Your run-of-the-mill cancer from exposure to radiation.
Good times.
It's something Russia's kind of become known for, is killing people with cancer caused by radiation.
I mean, if you ask me, before we get into the story of this, radiation shot into the atmosphere.
It did.
I'm pretty sure if you were alive in 1986, which you were not?
No, I was not.
You were in the womb.
No, I was born in 88.
Oh, never mind. Gerry doesn't count. For the rest of us, I think if you were alive in 1986, I'm pretty sure you have radiation from Chernobyl somewhere at some point in your life.
Well, considering I was born shortly thereafter, I would attribute my health problems to Russia.
Oh, there you go. I don't remember where, but I remember hearing that the radiation is like kind of, it ended up over either Greenland or Iceland.
Well, it went up into the atmosphere because of the fires and got taken by the wind and spread out all over Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, it also, I got to imagine it made it around the world.
Oh, absolutely. I don't see how it couldn't. But then again, we're not climatologists or really scientists for that matter.
I have nothing to base that off of. I just like thinking it. I have a little piece of Russia in me.
That's why they love you. So let's dive right into it here. Why did Chernobyl fail? What happened that day? And what became of Chernobyl afterwards? You would probably be surprised to know that even though Chernobyl exploded in 1986, it was still operating until 2000.
There's also, do you know there's people that still live in the town?
In the town?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, actually.
In Pripyat, or the exclusion area, as it's called now. Yeah, it's about 690 people.
Well, they're not people anymore. Now they're, you've seen Futurama, right?
I was kind of thinking about Fallout. What are those dudes in Fallout?
Super mutants.
No. The other ones. The ones that are like skinny as fuck and dying. I'm looking
Ghouls.
at Ghouls. Yes, I was thinking more like those 690 people are the ghouls from Fallout. And they just really want to sell me a thing of coffee.
They've just been trying to make money for the last 200 years, okay?
Yeah, man. They're just trying to survive. Meanwhile, I'm walking around with a mini nuke.
So now we kind of, we know where we're headed here. And as we typically do, I like to do background. So let's go into what was really wrong here. You know, there was a series of mistakes made on this day in history, but before that, I wanted to get into the science and technology behind the nuclear reactors themselves because they were steaming piles of shit.
Yes.
And
they were
again,
the Land Rover of nuclear reactors.
Usually. Is Land Rover from Russia? It's got to be.
No, it's British.
That spilled over. So Chernobyl, the site here, it had 4 reactors known as RBMK reactors, which translates in English to high power channel type reactor. Who cares? That's not as sexy.
Not steaming pile of shit reactor.
No, it's not as sexy, so we're going to stick with RBMK. And at the end of the day, RBMK reactors are poorly designed and unsafe pieces of shit. They're Land Rovers. They used enriched uranium as a nuclear fuel source, which is pretty common. But what they did different, and no other reactor type in the world has done this way, because it's a shitty idea, is they used a combination of graphite as a moderator and light water as an energy transfer medium. Now, I know what you're thinking at home. What the fuck does that mean? And I'm here to help you. We're going to dumb this right down for everybody. Light water sounds fancy, but it's just regular water. But a nuclear moderator is a material or a chemical used in reactors that slows down the neutrons you get when you split atoms, which from our energy episode, when you split atoms, makes a lot of energy, makes a lot of heat. That's nuclear fusion, or fission, nuclear fission. The moderator just slows down the particles so that they can be more efficiently used. And this was different with the RBMKs because it wasn't really common to use both light water and graphite. In fact, graphite is pretty shitty as far as moderators go because it needs to be incredibly pure to work. It's very sensitive to oxidation, it's not strong at all, and it can change dimensions in the heat produced by a reactor. But there's one good thing about graphite, Grizz. What do you think it is?
It likes to light on fire.
That too, but no. It's incredibly fucking cheap.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you're wondering about light water, it has that name because there exists in the world something called heavy water.
Which is used in all of everyone else's fucking reactors.
Right. And it's almost the same as normal light water, except, disclaimer here, this is a little bit of science. If you don't like it, sorry, it's here.
My brain.
It's almost the same as normal light water, except the hydrogen in the H2O combo has a proton and a neutron, where light water, which is what we drink, it's in your run-of-the-mill puddles and ponds, it only has a proton in its hydrogen, no neutron, which is why it's lighter. It has one less particle.
Oh, so it's heavy based off of atomic.
Yeah, so regular water is H2O, heavy water is small 2 H2O.
Okay.
So what was really different about the graphite use here? Let's get into some details on what this thing did. Normally, heavy water is used as a moderator, and it simultaneously acts as a coolant. Well, the brilliant minds on the RBMK design team made a decision that would shape the events of Chernobyl. They chose not to use any coolant to keep the moderator, in this case the graphite, cool. This created a situation where the operating temp of the graphite was about 700 degrees Celsius, or just short of 1300 degrees Fahrenheit for our American friends. 700 sounds hot on its own, but to understand just how hot that is for a nuclear moderator, let's look at Canada. Canada's version of a uranium reactor power plant uses heavy water instead of graphite, and its operating temp for the moderator is 70 degrees Celsius, or about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I don't know about you, Grizz, but that seems like a huge difference to me and a really bad idea.
There's multiple reasons to why the graphite is a bad idea and the heavy water is a good idea. Did you look into positive coefficient reactors at all?
I did. We're going to get into that in a few minutes.
Okay.
But I know that I brought up here the brilliant minds behind the RBMK. Did you know who that was? I think you had gotten some information on this guy.
I know who built Chernobyl. I don't know who designed the RBMK.
Well, he was using engineering designs from his Russian friends. Who built Chernobyl?
I'm going to fuck these names up. His name is Viktor Bruhanov.
Victor B.
So, Viktor is the former manager of construction for Chernobyl, and then later became the director of the plant. But, so Viktor's thrown over into what is now the Ukraine, and told by Mother Russia, which was then the USSR, to build this reactor. And he's given a whole heaping pile of shit to do it with. He's not even paid.
Well, it's Russia. He's paid with a place to live.
One of the bad things with communism is there's no real drive to build anything that's worth a damn. There's nothing to incentivize creativity. you really got to get into the communism as a whole to understand that constantly they were being told they had to reach these quotas. And the quotas were completely unrealistic. And so they would just fudge the numbers or all out lie or, use inferior materials. And so when he's building this reactor, he has these plans to go off of. And they're very specific, like most nuclear reactors are. And so he's ordering these materials and they're coming to him. And he's literally looking at him and being like, this is a steaming pile of Land Rover. Get this the fuck out of here. And he's throwing it away. Well, there comes a point where they start giving, Mother Russia starts giving him shit that he's not reaching his quotas because he's also taking gear that they're giving him, taking it apart, inspecting it, putting it back together if it's good, and then using it. So you can think about the timeline that it took to do anything.
Well, I got to say, that sounds like a good idea. Considering the quality control in Russia, it's not very good.
It was, but the problem is he's got fucking old micromanage behind him, fucking cracking the whip constantly. So now it just comes down to a point where he's like, fuck it. All right, they don't give a shit what the quality is. I'm just going to build it. And he ends up building this thing with inferior quality materials. There was one point where one of the roof of the reactor is supposed to be built out of a very specific material. And they didn't make this material in Russia at all. It hadn't happened yet. So he keeps saying, like, how am I supposed to make this fucking thing? We don't even make it. Finally, the scientists above him say, don't worry about it. It's fine. It won't be fine.
What was their solution? Concrete and steel, right?
Pretty much. One thing they had abundance of. Shit tons of concrete.
Concrete and steel. It's pretty much what most of Russia's made of.
And at one point, Victor even comes to the point where he's like, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to resign. I can't get this thing fucking done on time. And they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Get the fuck back to work. We don't want to see your ass over here. Go finish that thing. So Victor builds the Land Rover of nuclear reactors and then becomes the manager.
The good news is, though, he had a conscience about it. He did what he had to do because they would kill him otherwise. But, he was saying, yeah, this stuff, it's fucked up. We shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it because he said I'll die if I don't.
He really didn't have any right to be building a nuclear reactor.
No, he's not like a nuclear engineer or anything.
No.
He was an assistant turbine engineer, and he was a trainee fresh from the university.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, great. You know how to work turbines.
Interestingly enough, though, he's still alive.
Yes.
Yeah. He's about 85 years old now.
I think his wife's passed. Not that it matters.
Couldn't say. She wasn't there, though.
She was.
She did. She worked there?
She didn't work there, but she lived in
exactly.
Pripyat.
Everybody who was in Pripyat then lived there.
Except for 690 people.
Yeah, they had to have come back, though. Did they never leave?
The Ghouls?
Oh, yeah. The Ghouls. The Ghouls of Pripyat. Did they stay there the whole time?
Yeah, I don't know. I assume so. They're ghouls now.
Yeah, I'm kind of immune to it. I mean, all the animals are fine. I guess we'll be all right.
Dude, they're birds that are become radiation resistant.
Actually, there are still areas you can't go. It's kind of died down now. It's something like 20,000 years that it's really going to be radioactive. But it's kind of come down to the point now where they actually have a hostel there. I think they bumped the capacity up from 50-ish to 110 people now.
Yay. What I love, if you've ever watched any of those YouTube videos where people go to visit and stuff like that, and they're like, oh, the radiation isn't that bad. It's like, have you ever actually done anything to know how much radiation's bad for you? Because I can see those numbers and they're not good.
They lick their finger and hold it up. Yep, radiation's good today. We're going in.
They've got meters. It's just the tourists are never actually told what's a good number, bad number, or otherwise. It's just the tour guide is like, oh, let's move out of here.
Well, they did use the other 3 out of 4 reactors until 2000. So I guess if those people were able to live there for that long, you'd be okay for a little vacation. Now, if I'm being honest, I would go.
Really?
I would go. Yeah.
I mean, I have a morbid curiosity for it.
Yeah, me too. I love abandoned places. So we're getting off track. Let's get back into it. Now we know Victor B.
The douche that he is.
He knew this thing was a piece of shit. He told them. They said, get back to work. And he said, okay, I do. So now we know all about the moderator in the water. It was a bad idea. Now, the second major flaw is something that you had mentioned, Grizz. It's called a void coefficient. In the case of the RBMKs, this one's a positive void coefficient. Everywhere else on Earth uses a negative void coefficient.
Thank God.
Now, to put this in plain English, because we're not engineers here, and neither are you at home, most of you, so I'll just sum this up for you. Otherwise, it's a ton of boring science and math nonsense. Most nuclear reactors, they generate heat with whatever radioactive material they use in the core. This core is typically surrounded by heavy water, and the hot core heats up the water, turning it into high-pressure steam, and that high-pressure steam spins a big turbine. And a turbine is really like a big version of your car's alternator. When you spin it, it makes power. They do some shit with the power down the line and send it to you. In Chernobyl's reactor, as the water turned into steam, the core gradually became more exposed, so the water would come down and the steam would replace it. And as a result, it was an out-of-control reaction that produced over 100 times the rated energy output. That's a positive coefficient. The opposite is what most reactors do. As the water turns to steam and exposes more of the reaction out of water, it causes a decrease in power output with sort of an ability to self-regulate to lower the output. Now we know this was a bad idea from the start, but it's not the only time they fucked up, Grizz.
Yeah. So I didn't know this until researching, and I've done quite a bit of research into Chernobyl, because normally they just say, oh yeah, they fucked up beforehand. 1982, there was a partial core meltdown on reactor number 1. They didn't make it public until 1985, but whatever.
Well, that's Russia for you. They had a bad habit of doing their safety tests well outside of parameters.
Yeah, they were supposed to do this safety test before it was made operational. But yeah, so Russia repaired reactor number 1 and put it back into operation within months. I don't have details on how they did that one.
They probably did it with Gulag paste, which is just mashed up prisoners.
Oh, I guarantee it. All right, so let's start this all April 25th. It's a Friday. 1 o'clock in the morning.
I love Fridays.
Don't we all? That's also on top of this. Who the fuck runs a safety test on a Saturday morning?
That's when everybody's home using their energy.
Well, to be fair, they were supposed to run it Friday. So they've been supposed to be doing this safety test since before the reactor was ever brought online. And the whole idea of this safety test was in case there was a power outage or a blackout, they wanted to make sure that they could keep the turbines of the reactor still spinning with their own power long enough that their backup generators would come on. And therefore, they would never lose, their coolant pumps or basically electrical power to anything. And therefore, they could keep the reactor running instead of just scramming the reactor and, good night, whoever. So, 1 o'clock Friday morning. The reactor's running at full power with normal operation. Steam was directed to both turbines of both power generators. So it is running exactly how it is designed to run.
This initial safety test that you're talking about, Grizz, I knew a little bit about it, and they actually made a change based on this because they wanted to see how long they could power things as it wound down. They realized it wasn't long enough. So they redesigned the windings and put the new ones in. And that was actually why they were testing it on the night that everything blew up.
Oh, nice.
Which... that'll bring us right into that timeline, which started on April 25th, 1986.
Yes. I was 2.
I was not around.
So, 0 dark 30, Friday, April 25th, 1986. Reactors running at full power, normal operation. Steam is directed at both turbines of the power generators. Now for the test, they have to reduce the power of the reactor. The purpose of this test was to observe the dynamics of the RBMK reactor with limited power flow. So they've reduced the power to about 25%. Sorry, 50%. 12 hours after the initial power down of 50%, now only one turbine was needed to take the decreased amount of steam caused by the power decrease, and turbine number 2 was switched off. We're now at 2 o'clock Friday afternoon. Under the normal procedure of the test, the reactor would have been reduced to 30% power. But Mother Russia decides we can't fucking do that. It's Friday. People need the fucking power. People got to watch YouTube and shit. And because power was needed elsewhere, they told them, stay at 50% and go fuck yourselves.
I just want to point out, this is Russia. It's not YouTube. It's us tube.
Yes. My bad. Our tube.
Now, this test that they were doing, Grizz, one thing that I think a lot of people don't really realize about this, I actually never watched the Chernobyl miniseries that you saw.
Dude, so good.
So I don't know how accurate this was or what they portrayed. But when they were going into this test, they actually found through previous testing that the emergency cooling system was a bit of a nuisance. So they turned it off.
I was just about to say, Gerry.
And if there's one thing I've learned working on really delicate equipment and things that could kill me or people around anywhere within 300 miles is you don't turn off the safety equipment.
I don't know who taught you that, Gerry, because you're dead wrong. Oh,
you're right. I was trained in America, so I could be totally off base.
Safety off, always. So they've been running this thing all day since literally 1 o'clock in the morning at a reduced power. I'm not going to go into the science of it, but normally if you've been running that long for a reactor to do the tests they were going to do, you shouldn't be running it that low that long because the reactor's basically being strangled. And
this comes into the situation that I mentioned earlier where their water level is starting to drop because they're running it this long. They don't have any cooling water going to it. And now you're starting to slowly expose things that should never be exposed in an RBMK.
You're also getting into something called xenon. Essentially, xenon acts as like a moderator. It eats up all the neutrons that are flying about around this reactor. And so as long as xenon's there, the reactor can't really go up to power. It's like if you were in your car and you're hitting the throttle, but it's just not going anywhere. It's just, if you ever been in your car, maybe on a slippy surface, and the the traction control won't let you do shit, but you're sitting there requesting more power.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's where they're at. All right. So we've now made it to midnight, the 26th of April. It's Saturday. This dude doesn't want to fucking be here.
Do we know this dude's name?
Yeah, I'm about to say. His name is Alexander Akimov. Dude didn't think he was going to be doing a safety test. He knew that the other shift was doing a safety test, but now he's been handed a safety test. So he's fucking having a great night.
A safety test with the safety turned off.
A safety test that they've already screwed him on. It's like, hey, here's a test. All your parameters are fucked already.
Comrade Akimov, something wrong here, but I go home. It's Saturday. I don't want to be here.
Exactly. So he takes over some guy named Tregub. I know I jacked that one up. But apparently that dude stays on site. We'll call him Trayvon. All right. 28 past midnight. Control rods transferred from local to global control. Power plummets in the reactor. Further rods are withdrawn. So they're pulling rods out of the reactor, trying to reduce the power to the number they need for the test.
Which, I don't know if you're going to get to this point, Grizz, but I should point out, they're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, no, they're not supposed to. They weren't supposed to go to global control.
Even at global control, if they had read their manual or followed whatever instructions they had, they're not supposed to go below a certain number of rods, which was somewhere around 30 or 35 rods minimum. And they went down to like 5.
Yeah. This entire time, you should know that they have this guy named Anatoly Dyatlov, who is ultimately blamed for all of this. He seems like quite a dick. And like all things in Russia, he doesn't want to be told that you can't do what you're doing. So Akimov tells Dyatlov, we're not doing this right. This is fucked up. And Dyatlov says, do it or you have no fucking job. Now, at the same time, he probably told him he might kill him. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well, as a deputy chief engineer, I suppose he might have the power to kill people. I don't know how the social structure works in Russia.
Mother Russia, I'm pretty sure if you have any subordinates, you're allowed to kill them.
Okay. I guess he had the win there.
I mean, realistically, you at least had the fear. You're just going to tell them the fucking KGB's coming. So they're pulling out these rods, and the reactor drops from 1,500 megawatts to 30 megawatts. It's not good.
That's big no-no.
This is very big no-no. So Akimov says, hey, I don't know what's going on. It's not working. We shouldn't be doing this. Dyatlov says, bitch, get the fuck to work. Who's your daddy? Now, as Gerry just said, the deputy chief engineer, Dyatlov, supervised the test. At the moment, reactor power slipped to 30 megawatts thermal. He insisted the operators continue the test. He overrode Akimov's and Toptanov's objections. So both of your subordinates are saying something's wrong. He's no worky. But he doesn't give a fuck. And he's threatening to hand the shift back to Trayvon. intimidating them, English, into attempting to increase the reactor power. So they stabilize at 200 megawatts at about 1 o'clock, and it didn't go any higher. The reason it didn't go any higher is because right now the xenon is controlling the core. All the xenon is eating up all of those flying around bullets.
Now, this xenon, was that expected or unexpected?
So, if these people had been properly trained and knew what the fuck they were doing, then yes. Because it's known that at lower percentages, that reactor was going to produce xenon.
Which is a noble gas, as you said earlier, a moderator.
Yep. And so...
Which will slow down the ability for this thing to make
So
power.
the way they were supposed to come back up on power was slowly. That's why that holding the power band for the whole damn fucking day was a bad thing, because all they did was they builded up this gas, which was then eating at the reactor. So they think they're at 200 megawatts, and they are, but really the reactor's at a stationary point of like ready to fucking fly off the handles. Once all that xenon's gone, it's very bad. So at 1:03 in the morning, they connected the fourth cooling pump to the right loop.
This is 1:03 in the morning on the 26th now.
Yeah, we've Gerry, if you paid attention.
So we're now 24 hours into the shit show.
Yes. They've had a full 24 hours of not doing the right thing.
Well, it's Russia in 1986. It was a lot more than 24 hours. So at least 100 years.
I don't know, when did communism start?
It wasn't just communism. They had a whole history. We'll get into that someday.
Yeah, we will.
So anyway, now that I distracted you, back to what you were saying. 106 or something in the morning.
No, forget that. We've already moved to 119, Gerry. You're fucking way behind.
Shit.
All right. Shutdown signals blocked from the steam drum separators. Whatever that means.
A steam drum separator is, maybe you care to know, maybe you don't. So it's basically a ball. Water comes into the bottom, and the lower half of the ball is water. And when it heats up in the reactor, it comes into a tube in the top of the ball as steam, and they pass each other without interacting.
So anyways.
That's why it's called a steam drum. It's a place for the steam to be.
So the steam drum separators are trying to shut down the reactor. The operator stops this. He stops the shutdown due to low water level and the loss of both turbines because of a fear that a shutdown would abort the test.
Which is what they should have been doing.
They should have done this already. All right, the operator forces the reactor up to 7% power by removing all but 6 control rods. What were you saying, Gerry, earlier? I believe 35 was their minimum.
Yes, the minimum was somewhere between 30 and 35.
That's crazy. This was a violation of procedure, as the reactor was never built to operate at such low power. The reactor is unstable when its core is filled with water. The operator tried to take over the flow of water, which was returning from the turbine manually, which is very difficult because small temperature changes can cause large power fluctuations. The operator was not successful in getting the flow of water corrected, and the reactor was getting increasingly unstable. 2 minutes later.
For those of you interested in knowing the science, very small temperature changes in a steam system are incredibly dangerous because of the rate of expansion. If you have 1 gallon of water and you flash it all to steam, you have the equivalent of the space taken up of 1,700 gallons. 1,700 times expansion. So if you heat it up a little bit, you get a lot of it.
Now, Gerry, would you ever want to try to control water flow with your hands on a valve? Like in any situation?
Well, I have on small scales, but I would never want to do it.
Maybe in your garden with your thumb over a hose.
I don't think I'd stick my thumb over a leaking pipe or a flow pipe in a nuclear reactor.
No, I'm sorry, not happening. All right. We've made it to 121. We're operating a Land Rover.
So much has happened in so little time.
Yeah, literally. I love that we have details down to like the second. Which I don't know if I believe, but whatever. It's great.
I have to assume a lot of this is just made up. They're like, if you don't give us a time that this happened, you're dead. Yes. Wow. 129.
So, 121. This guy, who I'm going to fuck up his name too, Valery Ivanovich Pervochenko, is seeing the caps to the reactor jumping in the air. That's a good sign. He was present on one of the platforms at level 50 plus shortly before the explosion. He witnessed the 350 kilograms, that would be 700-pound blocks atop the fuel channels of the upper biological shield jumping up and down, and felt the shockwaves through the entire building.
That's impressive.
Yeah, a little bit. But remember, these weren't built out of the correct material. The rupture of the pressure channels was in progress. He started to run down the spiral staircase to level +10, which probably saved his life, because he's running to tell everyone else, what the fuck are you doing? There's one guy who did not run away. We'll get to him. Pressure falls in the steam drums. That's at 121.50. Meanwhile, Valerie up there is shitting his pants. All right, 123.40. So it's been all of 4 minutes. Emergency reinsertion of all control rods. They're sitting there going, we need to get all these in here. It's not working.
Why'd you take them out? They got to go back. Bad news for them, though. What happened when they tried to release them, Grizz?
Oh, so good. As the temperature of the water became too high, bubbles reached the main circulation pump. The coolant started boiling in the reactor. As the reactor power slowly increased, Toptonoff reports a power issue to Akimov. Akimov says fuck this and pushes that special button that's supposed to scram the reactor, called AZ5. Or if you watch the movie, AZ5. TV show. It's a class 5 emergency, or as I call, pants shitting emergency. The control rods, according to the synchro indicators, seized at a depth between 2 and 2.5 meters instead of inserting to their full depth of 7 meters. Akimov disconnected the clutches of the control rod servos to let the rods descend into the core under their own weight. But the rods didn't move because they were fucking welded. The reactor's now making some grumbling noises. And Akimov scratches his head. And the reactor control panel indicated no water flow and failure of pumps. Probably because everything was super fucking hot and just said no more. 123.44. The reactor reaches 120 times its full power because it's now burned off all of its xenon and is just running out of fucking control. Remember that pedal on the accelerator, Gerry?
Yes.
We've come off the ice now, but we didn't let off the pedal.
We hooked up, gained traction.
We can't. We've actually disconnected from our foot, but left the weight of our foot on the pedal.
We're done.
Yeah. All of the radioactive fuel disintegrates instantaneously, and pressure from all of the excess steam, which was supposed to go to the turbines, broke every single one of the pressure tubes, leading to an explosion.
Big boom.
1 second later. This is that. Remember that guy I told you about that stayed on that level? He didn't go anywhere?
Perevchenko.
No. He ran to tell people that the shit was jumping.
Breznik.
Nope. This guy's name is Valery Kodymchuk.
Oh, that guy. Okay.
Which I believe, if you watch the series, they gave the name of Kodymchuk to the fictional woman scientist who wasn't really there in the show. As a honor, I guess. But anyways, he was the first person to die in the disaster. And he was thought to be killed instantaneously when number 4 reactor exploded. His body was never found, and it is presumed that he is entombed in the reactor to this day. Which, I mean, he's...
Or vaporized, maybe?
I would say he was probably vaporized.
He's probably turned into a shadow on the wall.
That, or the lid hit him and launched him into Alaska. So... 123.45, exactly 1 second after our last update. The 1,000-ton lid above the fuel elements is lifted by the first explosion. The release of the radiation starts, air reaches the reactor, and the oxygen results in a graphite fire. This is excellent. This is getting great. The metal of the fuel tubes reacts to the water, the chemical reaction which produces hydrogen, and the hydrogen explodes. This is second explosion. We're having a good time.
As a frame of reference, 1,000 tons on that lid. One school bus is 12.5 tons.
Yeah.
We had many school buses.
Just think about what 1 ton is. Okay, that's 2,000 pounds.
It's a Volkswagen.
Is it a Volkswagen?
Yeah.
Like, holy fucking shit. You had a lot of pressure going on. I don't think anyone, except for maybe Gerry and I used to test things. I don't think anyone really understands what a PSI really does.
No, most industries, I don't think people really do.
So PSI, pounds per square inch, means you have 1 pound per square inch. I know that sounds stupid, but people don't calculate when you have a 36-inch hatch or door or surface how much that actually equates to. That was a side note. So, the second explosion. Burning debris flies into the air and lands under the roof of Chernobyl Unit 3, which I'm sure they shit their pants as well. And that is the general timeline of what the fuck went wrong.
So now we have kind of an idea of the play-by-play of what everybody fucked up. And so what time was it that the first responders got there?
So the first responders were not called for another, we'll say 15 minutes. They were called at about 1:45 in the morning. They got there about 5 to 10 minutes before 2 o'clock in the morning.
And when they showed up, they drove up to absolute carnage and burning radioactive graphite fucking everywhere.
Yeah. There are several eyewitness reports. They saw graphite when pulled up to the scene. They don't know what the fuck graphite is. They're firefighters. Several of them would pick it up, and they're like, one guy's response was, "This is hot." Okay.
And then his hand fell off.
Yeah. And minutes later, his skin fell off in a sleuthing, I believe is what it's called. So several of the firefighters, all of the firefighters, are trying to put out a fire that can't be put out. Some of the best stories came out of this, and one of them, I don't have a name to him. There's two very distinct firefighter stories. One of them is a firefighter that is off duty. Knew he was off duty, and what do you do in Russia when you're off duty, Gerry?
Go to work?
No. There's only one option. And even in Chernobyl, which was a pretty fancy town for that time, you get shit-faced drunk.
Oh, God, not what I expected to hear.
Fucking, come on, vodka, man. So anyways, we'll call him Fred. I don't have his name. Fred's fucking hammered. And he hears the emergency call come over, whatever the hell they call him on. He says, you know what? Fuck it. Everyone else is going. I need a good time. So he goes too. We'll get into Fred in a little while. Now we have Sven over here. I guess Sven's probably not. What's a good one? Boris? All right. So now we have Boris. Boris is responding to the fire. And Boris is going up the stairs to get onto the roof because he's been told by his commander, get on the fucking roof and put this fire out. As he's going up the roof, he sees two of his other firefighters coming down looking like they've got one fucking crazy hell of a tan. Oh, by the way, they're vomiting. It's good signs.
All their insides are turning into their outsides.
While he's going up to the roof and these guys pass him, he's on a fire escape. There's nothing there, right? They bump him and knock off his helmet. Now, even in Russia, fire helmets are not meant to protect you from radiation, but there's this crazy thing that they do a little bit because they're plastic. So he goes to the roof. Now he's getting fucking blasted with radiation.
That radiation was actually estimated to be about 5.6 rankins per second, equivalent to more than 20,000 rankins per hour. And for perspective, a lethal dose is around 500 rankins in modern radiation units over 5 hours. So they were getting fucking hammered.
Well, so that's the great thing. Radiation scares the shit out of my wife. It fascinates the fuck out of me. Hold on, I gotta crack another beer. So, this dude's going up to the roof. He's lost his helmet. He gets up to his roof, and he's told to put the hose down what is effectively a vent. But he has to climb up a little bit to get it. When he climbs up this vent, he reaches a couple feet off the ground, so he's now higher than his other firefighters. And his eyes literally stop fucking working because of the intense radiation that just fucking hit his head.
Crazy.
Can you imagine just going blind from radiation? You don't even know. Do you even know that radiation's happening? I don't know if they knew.
Could you imagine that climbing up the ladder? Guys, I can't see. I'm coming back down. Don't go up that ladder.
So he loses his shit.
I bet.
As most of us would.
Just to randomly go blind with no explanation at all.
To where his boss says, bitch, get the fuck back up that ladder.
But boss, I can't see. What ladder?
His vision comes back when he's not in the direct fucking light of the radiation. But that just blew my mind. I mean, I love the idea that there's something I can't see that could fuck me up so bad I just can't see. So that was my story of Boris. Now back to Fred. Fred, being shit-faced, we're going to jump this timeline here. You're going to learn that many of these firefighters, if not damn near all of them, die. Horrible, horrible deaths. Fred, being shit-faced, where does alcohol get processed, Gerry?
Liver.
Weird. Where does radiation get processed, Gerry?
Liver.
So if your liver's full of alcohol, can the radiation get processed there?
Not there.
He lived because he was fucking shit-faced.
Wow. That's a superpower.
Yeah. I was like, what? That's so fucking awesome.
So let that be a lesson to you. Anyone who works at a nuclear reactor, don't ever go to work unless you're hammered.
Nope, you better be fucking shit-faced. You might die at 23 because of alcohol poisoning, but that's fine.
I got to think that might be a little bit more pleasant than dying from acute radiation syndrome.
I don't know. I've known a couple drunks in my life. It's not a good time.
I've never known anyone with ARS, so I guess I can't compare it.
Oh, yeah, my bad. I guess it's better than having your face melt off.
Now we know a little bit about the firefighters and incredibly difficult job they had to try and put these fires out. They ended up putting it out with helicopter drops with sand, clay, lead, and boron. About 5,000 tons of a mixture.
Do you know how they dropped that?
Helicopter.
Well, yes, but do you know how they dropped it from the helicopter?
No, not particularly.
So if you watch the show, listen, if you find this topic interesting, go watch the show if you haven't already, because the show's awesome. I love it. It's not entirely accurate, but it's pretty damn good. It's good enough to keep you entertained. So if you watch the show, they're taking these big buckets and dropping all the sand and boron on the reactor. When in Mother Russia, what is their best resource they have?
Vodka.
Well, besides vodka. People.
Yeah, I was about to say that. People, yeah.
So, at this time, Russia's in fucking Afghanistan, trying to fuck up Afghanistan. So they call up and get all the fucking helicopter pilots back from Afghanistan, and they're flying over this reactor, which imagine if, like, I don't know, it's just a beam of light flying into the fucking atmosphere, and everything above it is gonna die. And they're flying over the top of this reactor, and instead of dumping it in with buckets that would make sense, they're literally pouring it in by hand from the helicopter. So imagine, take sandbag. Boris, I give you sandbag, yeah? You take sandbag and helicopter, then you drop sandbag into reactor, okay? Like, what the fuck?
You gotta respect that dedication.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, Boris was sitting there saying, if I don't do this, I'm gonna die.
Yeah, you're right. So they ended up...
And he knew nothing of radiation.
They ended up getting this put out. Kind of put out. We'll get into that a little bit later. So, Grizz, if you were in charge here, what do you think your reaction would be if you knew that in the middle of your town, you have a massive nuclear explosion and massive nuclear radiation leak? What would you do?
I'm going to take the Trump approach and tell everyone they're fine.
Well, that's exactly what they did, because they didn't even get evacuated until the 27th, which is a day, it's really 2 days after this whole thing started.
And not only that, the entire time, they're getting hit with a dose of radiation that is bad.
Absolutely. And they actually...
I believe...
Go ahead.
So, in America right now, if you've watched this show, you know that 5 rem per year is your limit. Mm-hmm. You can go over that, but it's still not nice. They were getting the equivalent of somewhere around, like, 100 rem in an hour. And it was going up incrementally.
Well, even though it was going up incrementally, officials talking amongst themselves basically said, it's fine. Pripyat will be okay. So the buses for evacuation didn't show up until 11 a.m. on the 27th. And that was when they started filling them up. And they didn't leave until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But they did have an evacuation announcement. And I'll read that for you here. This is translated, so I don't really...
I'm going to love it.
I don't really know
love all of it.
The accuracy here. But here's what it says. For the attention of the residents of Pripyat, the city council informs you that due to the accident at Chernobyl power station in the city of Pripyat, the radioactive conditions in the vicinity are deteriorating. The Communist Party, its officials, and the armed forces are taking necessary steps to combat this. Nevertheless, with the view to keep people as safe and healthy as possible, the children are being top priority. We need to temporarily evacuate the citizens in the nearest town of Kiev region. For these reasons, starting from April 27th, 1986, 2 o'clock, each apartment block will be able to have a bus at its disposal, supervised by the police and the city officials. It is highly advisable to take your documents, some vital personal belongings, and a certain amount of food, which is not a good idea, but just in case, with you. The senior executives of public and industrial facilities of the city has decided on the list of employees needed to stay in Pripyat to maintain these facilities in good working order. All the houses will be guarded by the police during the evacuation period. Comrades, leaving your residences temporarily, please make sure you have turned off your lights, electrical equipment, and water, and shut the windows. Please keep calm and orderly in the process of the short-term evacuation.
So what I love there is they're told it's temporary. These people never returned home.
I thought it just kills me that there he says, turn off your lights. You don't want to use the power.
Make sure that you're just like you're going on vacation. It'll be nice, it'll be warm.
It tells you just how clueless they were, too, when they said, bring some snacks. You're going to want to eat something.
Yeah. They went into the buildings and they were testing all the, inside the houses and stuff. Just having your window open, equipment, things inside the house were now radioactive at a level that was not healthy. I mean, realistically, no radiation is healthy, right?
Banana radiation is healthy.
That's true. It's different. Sorry. Iodine. How you say?
Iodine.
No.
What?
Iodine. Iodized.
Ionize?
Radiation.
Are you stupid?
Ionizing. I'm trying. Yes, we know this.
Ionizing radiation.
Thank you. God, my brain hurts. Yes, all ionizing radiation. No good.
Now, even though they evacuated everybody, they still didn't say anything. I don't know what these people getting evacuated were telling everybody. I mean, it was 1986. It's not like they could put a tweet out on it. But the Soviet Union didn't bother to say anything until the radiation levels set off alarms at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, which is over 620 miles or 1,000 kilometers from Chernobyl.
Which they then called up Hans Bricks.
So,
fucking killing me, Hans.
Sweden called up Russia. Guys, we got some noise here. Did something happen?
They called up Poland first. Poland doesn't even have fucking reactors at that time. It's got to be Poland. Call them up.
It's funny, the Polish have been getting picked on for a long time. They just immediately assumed Poland fucked something up.
Had to be Poland.
Oh, this is suspicious. So we better call the first people we can think of who have nothing to do with radiation.
I actually believe the last people they called was Russia.
They probably didn't want to talk to them.
Well, I mean, fuck. They also knew that whatever response they were going to give, no, it's fine. It's fine. Boris, take care of it. And again, I'm not trying to shit on the Russian people. I'm shitting on communism. So I don't know if you know this, Gerry, with Sweden calling everyone to find out whose reactor exploded.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Mikhail Gorbachev actually found out the true, or at least in his words, the true nature of what was happening. So far, he had been told there was an issue.
That's pretty typical, really, of any government. It happens here, too, in America.
Yes, I know.
People try to sweep everything under the rug until everyone's like, no, that's a serious problem. You got to tell us about it.
I'm a fan of telling people how fucked up it is and watching them crumble, and then I fix it.
Now I know why you used to work on cars.
So the Land Rover is still on fire. Oh, wait, no, actually, sorry. The fire's put out, but it's still hot.
Yes, and they actually, so they ended up covering it up. Not the event that got out, but the actual reactor number 4, they ended up covering it up with just some shitty nonsense. It didn't do anything. We can basically call it sheet metal. That's how effective it was. But I want to say it was 2000. Was it 2004? They put the big thing over it.
No, I think that's when they did the. I guess it was a contest to figure out the right one. I don't think it actually was finished until 2018.
Completed July 2019. The new safe confinement.
Damn, I was close.
Yeah, you were. You're real close. And yeah, it was an international design competition. Could you imagine that?
Dude, that's the best way to fucking get shit, man.
Yeah.
Well, at the time they did this, it actually wasn't Russia. Because the USSR fell in, what was it, 96 or something?
I don't remember the year.
And so that's when it's become Ukraine, and Ukraine didn't have the infrastructure to pay for any of this. They just became a country. Russia basically wrote them off and said, peace, you're radioactive. Thanks, ghouls. So there's they've created a government sanctioned thing where they basically all the countries of the world pay money into it because we don't want to die.
So this international design competition was a global effort to contain the still leaking radiation, which is still happening now. And that was in 1992. Ukraine's government held this for basically the proposals to replace it, what they called the sarcophagus. And it's
which
what
was
it
a
is.
shit ton of concrete.
Yeah, and it didn't work very well. And I just had a thought how funny this would be, because we go to places like Egypt and we go through all the tombs and we're taking everybody's shit out. Could you imagine being the poor bastard who's like, what is this big concrete thing? Let's go inside. And all of a sudden you fucking melt 2,000 years from now.
I was going to say fucking so far from now that they don't even discuss it anymore in the history books.
Yeah, because this is going to be radioactive for 20,000 years.
Oh, that's nothing.
Nothing in Earth scales. But they ended up completing the new confinement structure in 2019. And this new confinement structure is an arch-shaped steel structure with an internal height of 92.5 meters or 303.5 feet. And a 12 meter or 39.5 foot distance between the centers of the upper and lower arch chords. The internal span of the arch is 800 feet, 245 meters. And the external span is 270 meters or 885 feet. The dimensions were determined based on the need to operate equipment inside the new shelter. So they have gantry cranes and everything in there.
Yeah, they're remote controlled.
Not that I would ever want to go in there. I actually remember watching the coverage of this when they put it all together and they covered the last part. It's pretty cool shit. But they needed to do that because, as I said a couple minutes ago, this is going to be radioactive for 20,000 years, so it's constantly leaking out and affecting everybody around them and globally, really. Not so much now, but when it first happened, the winds, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, picked up all that radioactive smoke and burning graphite and just gave it to everybody. So the radiation released during that accident was three main types. It's iodine-131, cesium-134, and cesium-137. Now, some of these are bad, some of these are manageable, I guess you could call it. Now, when iodine-131 is released into the environment, it's transferred to humans and taken up by the thyroid gland, which they had in the area, they had somewhere around 20,000 cases of thyroid issues between 1986 and present day. Highly suspicious. It's probably from Chernobyl.
Yeah, but their official numbers still sit at 54.
Yeah, it's going to be the same thing as COVID. We're never going to know how many it actually killed.
Oh, God, no.
Now, one issue they had was children exposed to radioactive iodine usually receive higher doses than adults because they have a tiny thyroid gland and higher metabolisms. And cesium isotopes have a longer half-life, which is like 2 years for 134 and 30 years for 137. And that means it's going to get into your food and your water and get ingested over the course of 30 years.
Oh, fantastic.
Let's talk about real quick the health impact of the workers directly, which we know how some people melted and some firefighters went blind temporarily and then died. But on the day of the accident, there were 600 workers on site. 134 of them suffered the ARS we talked about. 28 of them died in the first 3 months. And for anybody who survived radiation sickness, recovery took several years. And I don't know if I would personally ever call that recovery. I don't know about you, Grizz.
I don't know if I'd call it recovery, but they have to go through bone marrow transplants. And not like, oh, we're just grafting some. They're complete bone marrow fucking transplant. That's awful.
Ream it out, fill it back up.
Literally.
So out of the 600 workers on site, the increased incidences of leukemia and cataracts were recorded for those exposed to the higher doses of radiation. Other than that, there's been no increase in the incident of solid cancers or leukemia among the rest of the exposed workers. And there's no evidence of increases in other non-cancerous diseases from the ionizing radiation either. And the 530,000 registered recovery operation workers who worked at the accident site from 86 to 1990 were exposed to doses ranging from 20 to 500 MSV, averaging about 120. So a lot of these people are still being monitored today. Let's talk about the 115,000 members of the public who had to be evacuated. Their average effective radiation dose was about 30 MSV, and radiation doses to the general public in the 3 contaminated countries, which we didn't talk about before, but it's Belarus, Russia, the Russian Federation, and the Ukraine. On average, they were relatively low, with an average effective dose of 9 MSV, which is about the dose of a CT scan.
Now, MSV is millisievert?
Yeah, so this is just a smaller measurement for radiation. Most people got the effective radioactive dose of a CT scan. Not that bad. And the total worldwide average effective dose from natural background radiation, for comparison, is about 2.4 MSV per year. And for some reason in Canada, it's 1.8.
Probably due to the angle of the Earth's rotation.
There's also, so far, no evidence of decreased fertility in men or women in the affected regions. Because the doses to the general population were low, it's pretty unlikely there would be any increase in stillbirths or pregnancy complications or anything like that. I still say that's why my internals are mush, because my parents were in their prime in 1986, and they made me a couple years later. So, Russia, thanks for fucking me over.
Well, what I loved all this is Gerry and I worked around reactors. I literally didn't receive a single dose of anything the entire time I worked around them.
I don't think I did either, but they don't always tell you.
You can look it up.
Yeah, I never bothered.
Yeah, I have 0. They have to give you a yearly thing. But anyways, obviously Gerry didn't get his, so maybe you're dead, Gerry, and we just don't know it.
Well, my hair is getting thinner.
But anyways, and I can't equivocate this to other companies, but I noticed that everyone that we worked with always died from cancer.
Actually, I know a lot of people in the area where we worked, and there's a joke that I've heard that 60% of people who work there die of cancer. It's totally made up.
But I mean, of the people I know that I worked with that have passed, they're older gentlemen or women. But they all die from cancer.
And there's a suspicious amount of bald people.
Does baldness have anything to do with radiation, Gerry?
Yeah, sure it does.
Oh, okay.
In my mind, anyway. I have nothing to back that up.
Oh, you're like the anti-vaxxer moms who just need something to blame for your weakness?
Yes. No vaccines. I want to keep my hair. It's pretty. Where were we?
You were talking about the health effects of acute radiation syndrome.
No, just...
Well, actually, you were talking about chronic, but sure.
Yeah. So, other than the stats that we just kind of spit out here, other than the immediate area of Belarus, Russian Federation, Ukraine, most people were okay. But this did put a bad taste in people's mouth for nuclear power, which is unfortunate, as we discussed in our energy episode.
Literally.
Because if you do it not the Russian way, the everybody else way, you're probably going to be okay. Most of the time, you don't have any issues. But now that we have the nuclear fusion, we're going to be doing much better.
Yes, that nuclear fusion that we've perfected so well.
By late 2020s, we're going to have something up and running, making power.
Right. All right, so as Gerry's explained, Sweden kind of opens up this can of worms on Russia and lets the whole rest of the world know that something's gone bad, right? So Russia's still kind of denying it at this point. They really haven't made a statement at all. And at this point, the U.S. and I believe it was Britain flies spy planes over Chernobyl, take pictures and go, no, that bitch is open. She burning. So the cat's out of the bag. And Pripyat has become what is essentially just a militarized state. Like the only people there are military, right? They're trying to clean up the mess. They're trying to put out the fire. Well, they're not quote unquote literal fire. Because even though they've poured sand and boron on this thing, it's still running away. It's still a massive ball of molten fucking radiation, which if you haven't seen the pictures of the elephant's foot, cool shit. We'll get into what that is. So now they're trying to figure out ways that they can get this all down. And one Russian colonel is actually trying to figure out what the actual dosage of radiation is, because he's sending his men in, and they're not believing the numbers they're getting. One of the numbers keep popping up, and they're sitting there thinking that their equipment's not working. And finally, they get a good dosimeter, and he has 2 of his guys drive it right past the opening to the reactor. And as they drive by, it comes back saying 2,080 Ronkin per hour, which is you're going to die in like a matter of minutes. And he's like, how the fuck am I going to put my people in there? But Russia being Russia, they got to throw people at this because they don't have anything else to throw at it. One of the things so there's this task force that is in charge of essentially fixing this issue. And if you've heard anything about it, you know about Valery Legasov, who's the chief scientific investigator. He also has a team of scientists with him. They don't really get into their names at all.
They're just Russian bodies. They don't
Pretty
care.
much. And the whole time in the beginning, you have, do you remember Viktor Brukhanov?
Yes.
Him and the chief engineer at Chernobyl, Nikolai Fomin, are kind of trying to undercut it. They're trying to make it seem like it's not as bad as it is, even though, especially Fomin, he knows how bad this is, but he doesn't want to admit it. So they're now at the point where they got to handle all this fucking, what is essentially reactor rods and graphite, or probably it's radioactive materials and graphite that's on top of the roofs, which is literally the deadliest place on the world at this time. And now you're sitting there thinking, how would I get all this shit off the roof, Gerry?
A rake.
Pretty much. Shovels. Shovels and people. And that's where the infamous liquidators come into play, where literally Russia takes soldiers and would put some lead shielding in a couple different areas, especially their nuts, and send them out for a period of time on top of this roof and say, hey, take whatever you can and throw it into the burning reactor. So let's give it some more shit. I love Russia. It fucking kills me. So they need to get all this radioactive material off these roofs. And they actually contacted Germany, of all places, to get a nice little rover to clean off all this radioactive material on the roof. And now Germany, as we know, builds fantastic things. Russia says to Germany, we need you to build this rover. Germany says, sweet, what are you getting for radiation? Russia tells them their low spec number that they've been getting, which is like 8, which is thousands of times lower than what it actually is. Germany's like, sure, I got this shit. And they build this rover, give it up to Russia. Russia goes, puts it on the roof, and I believe it lasted seconds before the radiation was so bad it fucking fried the computer inside the thing. So they can't even admit how bad it is to people to build, because they don't even know what the fuck they're dealing with. Because as Russia, when it's communist times, they're not listening. It's just like, weird, COVID. Just like nowadays, they can't base it off of the people who know what the fuck they're talking about, right? They don't want to sound bad. So instead of looking bad to the rest of the world, they just give them small numbers. They fucking cook the books like they did with everything else. So now they don't even have a rover to do shit with. So what do? They turn to Russia's greatest resource.
Vodka.
It's people. And this is where those infamous liquidators come to. Yeah, I'm sure some of them had vodka in them. I would.
Well, it's a good way to avoid getting killed by radiation.
Yep, it's true. So with vodka and maybe a little bit of lead shielding, they go on top of these roofs, and for a predisposed time, they go up there with a shovel and shovel off these radioactive fragments into a reactor.
There's one good thing about people. They don't have circuit boards that'll fry.
No. Although we did learn of the one dude who went blind, and there was another guy who just lost his hearing, like instantaneously.
Okay, so we have some circuit boards, but we'll still operate.
And actually, I believe most of the liquidators live pretty long. I don't think there's too many records of them dying that fast. Some of them did, but some of them lived quite a long time. So these liquidators clean off the roof finally. And again, due to Russia's people, it's probably the only reason they ever got out of the mess. Because if this happened in America, we wouldn't do that. We'd be fucked.
No, we would not put bodies up there.
We would have fucking shelled off however many square miles and said, it's done. Don't go there.
Put up a fence. We can't go here anymore.
That's the no-no zone. Every year you'd hear some kid crossing the fence and dying instantaneously.
That's Area 52.
Yeah, that start fucking Naruto running over to it. So while these task forces trying to put out the literal fire that's happening in Chernobyl, a lot of the acute radiation poisoned people are shipped to hospital number 6. And this is the only hospital that knows how to deal with radiation poisoning. Probably because this is where the people from other radiation things have gone to, like, I don't know, K-19. And this is where they go into doing the bone marrow transplants and all, amongst other things. But so the firemen and everyone who's showing up, when you get ARS, you have a period where in the beginning when you get high dosage, you start vomiting and shitting your pants. And then it goes away and you feel fine. And that's called the latency period. This is when they all showed up to the hospital. So all these firemen are showing up, joking, shooting the shit, not really caring that much, thinking they're okay. And all the hospital workers who have dealt with radiation before are sitting there going, oh, these are no good. Most of them were dead within days.
28 in total, was it? Or 31?
So it was 28, and then they changed it to 31 in later years. And it actually wasn't until like 2005 that they changed it to 54. And again, I think it was also 2005 when the WHO was like, yeah, it's probably more like 4,000.
Yeah, that commission really unearthed a lot of information that Russia, as they do, decided to hide.
Yeah. So the 10th of May is when Akimov finally dies, receiving radiation burns over all of his body. He actually received an award for courage of the 3rd degree, because Russia has those fantastic awards.
Matches 3rd degree burns.
I think that was higher than 3rd degree burns, but whatever. So one thing that this task force feared after they had cleaned up the roofs was they had no clue where the fuel was, right? How the hell are you going to tell? You get a concrete building and it's fucking literally deadly to stand near it, right? They don't have a clue where the fuel is gone, right? One of their fears is that it's gone into the water tanks. And the water tanks that is now full of water. And so they need to send in some people to drain the water out of these tanks so they don't have another explosion. This is what their fear is. At the time, there was a belief. Have you ever heard of the movie The China Syndrome?
No.
So it was a movie that came out sometime in the 80s. It was actually pretty popular around the time. It is completely unfactual. And the belief is that nuclear reactors will have a meltdown and their molten fuel will melt down into the soil and melt down through the earth to the other side of the earth, being China.
It's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard.
Yeah, it can't happen. But that was the fear, and it was a legit. They thought it would happen, even though many scientists debunked it in its day. They still believed it was a thing. So this was their fear, and they were always trying to stop it throughout all this time. They wanted to make sure that the fuel wasn't going to melt through the concrete block that was at the base of this reactor. So they actually go and get what is the coal miners of the USSR, and they talk to what would be a union in the States, and they get them to dig underneath the reactor, and they put in a cooling unit with liquid nitrogen, as they want to cool off the concrete so it can't melt through the concrete, and to the point where they actually build another encasement. So they're fearing that the molten fuel is going to enter these other fuel tanks, and they have to send 3 men in. And they actually asked for volunteers. I was quite impressed on this, because normally Russia doesn't ask for volunteers. And they send in these 3 guys to let out the water that we didn't talk about, but Akimov put in there earlier. These 3 guys go in, being told they're going to die because of radiation. They go in. They're sitting in radiated water. Everything around them is stupid high. Their flashlights are dying because the radiation is so fucking high. And in actuality, they make it out and don't die from radiation poisoning, which is amazing. Now, finally, when everything's all said and done, Russia decides they have to build this sarcophagus that Gerry was talking about earlier, which is essentially just a fucking concrete encasement around everything, because they had nothing else that they could do. They were literally just pour concrete trying to cover it in every other way because you couldn't get close enough to do anything. After they encase it, for years, they're searching for where the fuel went. And finally, I don't actually have a date on it. Do you have a date on it, Gerry?
Yeah, December 1986.
So December of later in that year, they finally find, with actually a little remote control robot, they took a RC car, like a kid's toy car, and they attached a dosimeter to it. And they would drive it around, making sure it was okay for people to move. And they find an area through the pipings that is insanely fucking high with radiation. And what they found was what they now called the elephant's foot, which is essentially where all of the molten fuel had been traveling through the pipes of their systems, had finally come to a place and stopped, and is what now is known as the elephant's foot, because it looks like an elephant's foot. It's probably one of the deadliest places on Earth.
Yeah, it's made up of nuclear fuel, melted concrete, and metal. So it won't go to China, but it is still hot. And so to tell you how deadly it is, if you spend 30 seconds near it, you'll get dizzy and you'll experience fatigue. 2 minutes near it, and your cells will start to hemorrhage. And by the time you hit the 5-minute mark, you're dead. And even after 30 years, the foot is still melting through the concrete base of the power plant.
That's crazy.
So it's not going to go to China, but it's going to be hot to the touch for centuries.
I'm sure touching is a good idea.
Yeah, if you can't stand near it, you probably shouldn't touch it. But if you did touch it, it's going to be nice and warm.
Like a warm hug. There's actually 2 places that I believe are even higher in radiation, which I don't know how that's possible.
What are those places?
One of them is where they took off the firemen's clothing in the hospital. So when the firemen went to the hospital, they took off all their clothing because some nurse had the brilliant idea that, hey, fuckers, their clothing is still radioactive. It's now become a source. You need to take that shit off of them. So there's actually a pile of clothing of firemen's gear, their turnout gear, in the basement. And the radiation there is so fucking high. And then there's actually a claw, like on a heavy equipment claw, that they use to pick up and move shit around, that is also become a source and is ridiculously high. I don't know what the numbers are coming off of it. I'm sure it's fucking lovely. And that's the story of Land Rover. I mean, Chernobyl.
Yep, that's the story, Chris. And it's pretty interesting. I still stick by what I said, even though this shit happened, that nuclear power is the way to go. Just not that shitty Russian nuclear power put together with bubblegum and Gulag glue. So what?
That Gulag glue is strong.
So thanks, guys, for listening. Grizz, what is it we're going to be going over next week on next week's episode?
Gun control.
Interesting. Pretty divisive topic. I guess you guys are going to have to tune in to see how we approach it.
As always, you can find us wherever you find your podcasts. Please leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps. Our website is beautifulbastardspodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook at Beautiful Bee Podcasts. We are on Twitter at PodBastards. Thanks for listening.
And remember, guys, never run your reactors dry.
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.